Well, that was an awesome conversation. I knew it was going to be great to talk to Colonel Ryan, my old friend from college, but I wasn't sure where we would go because her experience is so vast over the past 30 years. But we really ended up talking so much about values and just how you're finding your path on the planet. I believe you will find something that will be really useful for you if you just open up and listen to this episode. So thanks for joining us.
The world is a lot right now. Are you feeling it? We all need new tools to help us walk through the chaos with grace, ease, and compassion for each other and for ourselves. In this podcast, you'll hear from parents, educators, and other experts who can bring perspective to the monumental job of parenting. It's time to level up and be warriors for our kids and our communities. This is the Warrior Parent Podcast. I'm Marci Mitchell.
And I'm Debbie DeMano. As parents, we understand that it really does take a village to raise our kids. We hope that this podcast serves to create and support that community for you. Join us as we discuss and practice our core tools, which are proven mind-body techniques that can be used by anyone to improve your life on a daily basis.
Welcome back to the Warrior Parent Podcast. I'm so glad that you are joining me today. We're still in the month of November, and we have dedicated this month to our veterans and talking about issues around veterans as well as men's mental health. But today I'm really excited because we are having my dear friend from way back when I was in ROTC, Colonel Diane Ryan, on the show. And I have not really seen her in a long time. She's been super busy. I am going to read her introduction, and I'm not going to cut it back because she's got so much great information in here. So I'm going to go through this real quickly and tell you a little bit about Diane Ryan. So she is a practitioner scholar who for more than 3 decades has taught, coached, and mentored both individuals and teams to elevate their performance and build ethical leadership capacity under the most extreme circumstances and challenging situations. So career U.S. Army officer, and she distinguished herself as an agile leader in command and staff assignments, both stateside and abroad. During her last combat assignment with the 1st Cavalry Division in Baghdad, Iraq, she founded a U.S.-Iraqi partnership for military women and worked with several NGOs on peace and security initiatives. More recently, she served as a strategy consultant to the commander of the U.S. Army Pacific, designing leadership development exchange programs for several key U.S. partners. Since transitioning from the military in 2017, Diane has been the Associate Dean for Programs, Administration, and Research in the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. Dr. Ryan oversees a portfolio of programs and curricula that service the entire undergraduate and graduate student body, as well as provide resources for faculty research and professional development. Diane's teaching and research is focused on leadership development. She is a co-investigator on Project ARETE, a 5-year longitudinal study of character and leadership development at the United States Military Academy. Dr. Ryan also holds a secondary appointment as an associate professor at the Elliott Pearson Department of Child Study and Human Development in the Tufts School of Arts and Sciences and teaches global leadership at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Additionally, she serves as the faculty of Thayer Leadership in West Point, New York. Prior to joining Tufts, she was an academy professor, director of the Eisenhower Leadership Development Program with Columbia University, and deputy department head in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership at the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. She retired from active duty with the rank of colonel and was recently inducted in the U.S. Army Women's Hall of Fame for her efforts in promoting women in the military and leadership. I'm so excited about that part. And that was a mouthful. That was a lot. Like I said, that is a career still going, but deserving lots of accolades. So well done, Diane. It's so great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Marci. As someone who knew me way back when, I'm sure you're very surprised when you read all those things. Like,
I am not surprised. I am impressed. And yes, we knew each other when we were much younger, and all the stuff that goes with being young. So who knew all the stuff you were going to do? It's wonderful. And I do want to just take a moment to say, you may notice I'm here alone today for for our listeners, and for those watching the podcast. My partner Debbie is under the weather, so she's taking care of herself, which we talk about all the time, so that she can come back full bore and full power soon. But today it's just going to be me and Diane catching up, hearing about all this great stuff that she's doing. So Diane, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Tell me a little bit about, like you said that about how long it's been since we saw each other. Just this is a lot, but just tell me a little bit about how you got. Really, honestly, I want to hear how you kind of got from you and I back in Massachusetts at WPI Worcester Polytech ROTC, and then really launched into your career and your life in leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Marci. Thank you so much for thinking of me. It's such a privilege and really humbling to stay connected all this time and to be
Yeah.
able to support each other in this way. So I think you might remember that I was sort of an unlikely cadet, and really pursuing an Army career was not in the long-term plan. It was, take this opportunity, get this scholarship money, pay
Mhm.
for college. I was a first generation college student. My father had ninth grade education. My mother couldn't go to college because she had to support her family. I
Mhm.
was the oldest. My parents put a lot of value in education. I think a lot as a result of their own regrets. And
Mm.
they were definitely lifelong learners. They didn't have a lot of formal education, but my father could build anything. He spent all this
Mm.
time like reading and understanding how things worked. My mother was an avid reader, always had a big pile of books on her bedside table,
That's
and
always a good sign.
would read, both, would rather read than do anything. And
Yeah.
those two things and the notion of service
Mhm.
were really important values in our family's life. And I ended up going to a Jesuit college, Holy Cross. And
Mhm.
I didn't have an appreciation for the Ignatian values while I was there, but apparently they were like subversively,
Seeds were planted.
seeping into my DNA. And so I, have the Army ROTC recruiter is there saying like, here's money for college. And I knew I wouldn't be able to stay in school if I didn't figure out a way. My parents had
Mhm.
3 kids behind me, and, they were
Mhm.
barely holding it together. We were very working class. So I said, I'm going to do this thing. I thought I was going to be a reservist. I decided, I'll see what this active duty thing is about. I saw people going to Europe. That seemed like a very fun thing.
Yeah.
So I go to this first assignment, and I think you might remember I was not particularly skilled in the military things. Like I made up for it maybe in enthusiasm, but like a lot of it was very foreign to me. So I was a little clueless, and got to my first assignment, got an amazing, it was the dream team of leadership. My
Mm.
battalion commander was amazing. The XO was amazing. My first company commander was amazing. Most of my peers were really good and really supportive. And not my first platoon sergeant so much. He was okay. But my
Yeah.
second platoon sergeant was amazing. And
Yeah.
those people just really taught me so much about leadership.
Mhm.
I think the seeds had been planted. So you and I had a great mentor in Clarence Plant. And,
Yes.
he set some expectations about what to look for. And then I got in this really good situation. And at the end of that, I literally thought I was just there for my obligation, and then I was going back into civilian life.
Yeah.
But I traveled all around Europe. I had these great friends. I had all these learning opportunities. I deployed in there. I went to Desert Storm in the middle of it. That was super exciting.
Mhm.
Um, I met the person who ended up becoming my partner, who was also a at that time had a career. He'd already had 10 years in, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of that, it was time for me to decide what's next. And so I asked myself 3 questions. Am I having fun? Am I learning new things? Am I making a difference? And the answer to all those 3 things was yes. So I said, I'm going to take it one assignment at a time. And I'm
I
going to
love
ask
that.
myself every time, are these 3 things true?
Yeah.
And, it wasn't always sunshine and roses. Trust me.
No.
Like there were some really hard slogs,
Mm-hmm.
two periods in particular, like right around the 10-year mark, my father died really unexpectedly. I had a new baby. My husband had retired from the army.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a new job. We had a stepchild coming to live with us for the first time ever. We had a hurricane that like my neighbor had a heart attack in the front yard. I had to do like CPR on him.
Oh,
All these
wow.
things were like, if I took that life change uh, scale, all those things were just causing tremendous stress. And I thought, okay, it's time for me to walk away. But then I realized like, no, I'm halfway there. Just stay the course and see what the next thing is. So
Yeah.
I kept having these opportunities, and particularly around education. So they sent me for one master's degree. And then I knew I wanted to continue and probably get a doctorate. I felt this calling to teaching, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to be able to achieve that goal. And then on my second deployment to Iraqi freedom, I ran into this military sociologist who worked at West Point. And when I
Mm.
was doing that women's program, was quite happenstance. Like it's one of those things, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I had done my master's in international relations. I had a little bit of a background in psyops and civil affairs, but I'm back to my signal/IT responsibilities. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing signal stuff in Iraq, and the 2-star comes to me one day and says, hey, there's this women's group that meets down at the Civic Center every Sunday, and we don't really have anybody to send to that. So be good idea to have a woman talking to other women. So would you go down there and hear what they have to say and let us know if there's things that we should be concerned about? So I met these women, and prior to that, I'd been doing all this contracting around IT infrastructure, like putting in
Mm-hmm.
switches, laying fiber optic cable, working with all these different contractors, like all Middle Eastern guys who are like,
Yeah.
what's your rank? How much money are you in charge of? How many people do you have? Like very focused on sort of my legitimate power. I go to
Yes.
this women's group, and the first question they ask me is, are you married? Do you have children? Can I see pictures of your children? Do you miss
Yeah.
your children? What are they interested in? And they were really interested in forming a relationship with me.
Nice. And these, just to be clear, these are Iraqi women.
Iraqi women.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the thing that motivated me to do something more for them. Like, because now I feel like I am them. Right.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
this is regardless of what you thought about the reasons for going to the war, the deal
Right.
I made with myself was I'm going to do the best I can possibly do with the things that I have
Mm-hmm.
and try to make it better for somebody. And
Yes.
so I I started spending all my time thinking about these women and like what was the meaning of this. And I'm just like going through the motions with my day job stuff and
Yeah.
looking forward to every Sunday where I know I'm gonna
Wow.
have this like really like soul soothing experience to be
Yeah.
around these people, these women who their biggest concern is just the safety and security of their family and
Of
like
course.
reclaiming their rightful place in society,
Yes.
and trying to survive in all this, conflict and volatility and
Mm-hmm.
ambiguity, et cetera. So in the midst of this, there's this military sociologist who had come over for the summer, and he was a professor at West Point. And he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about teaching there?" And I actually had at two different points in my career. Once when I was second lieutenant, I saw this advertisement in the back of the Army Times, and I called them up, and they're like, call us back in about 6 or 8 years. And then when it was like 6 or 8 years later, it just wasn't going to work out for the dual career thing. So I sort of gave up on that dream, and I thought, well, maybe someday I'll go back to school, be a college professor when I get out. And that would have been in maybe like 4 years from, I think I was like at 15 or 16 years at that point. So I was just kind of making it to retirement. And then this
Yeah.
guy was like, "Hey, you should come to West Point." I said, "Oh, I think that ship sailed. It's not possible for me." And he was like, "No, we take PhD rotators. So you could go to school for 3 years and then come and teach for sometime." What I thought was going to be about 3 years, that turned into almost 10 years.
Wow.
So I'd spend these sleepless nights in my hooch thinking about, do I go be a battalion commander, which is what everybody expects me to do, or do I go take this alternative path? And I struggled mightily, and the battalion command list came out, and I was on it, and I was going somewhere, I think actually to a signal conference. And I got on the plane with some stranger, but we had some mutual acquaintances and just started up a conversation. And I told him, I have this big life decision to make and I don't know what to do. And I told him what the two choices are. And he was like, "Oh, I know what you should do." And I said, "You just met me. How do you know what I should do?" He goes, "Because you completely lit up when you talked about teaching and going to West Point."
Exactly. Exactly.
So that helped me make my decision.
I love that you bring this up because this was one of the things that I found very interesting, and at times I want I don't know if I want to say challenging, but certainly it caused pushback in me always was. And so, if people are listening and you have military service, then you're going to relate to this. If not, then you can learn about this sort of and again, things change, but this culture of how you do it. So I love right when you said, "I'm just going to take it assignment by assignment and decide," because that's not really what's drilled into you. It's like, okay, you're going to make this plan for your 20 years and you're going to go to this assignment and you need a tactical and you need to da 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 and all these things in order to be successful. And most people, or at least a lot of people, will just buy into that and they'll be like checking things off. And that never resonated for me. I was always like, "Oh, I don't want to do that, but I like doing this. Why can't I do the things I like to do and that I'm good at?" And I even had this very funny moment at my advanced course. So I was military intelligence, went back to Fort Huachuca for my advanced course after my first, three, I ended up being a little more than 3 years assignment. And it's 6 months at Fort Huachuca where we had a big class of like 40 people where you're in class all day long. And one day, this high ranking officer, I don't remember what his rank was, honestly, but he came to speak to us and he was talking about career progression and all of this. It's a big deal in the military, what you're going to do. And he was like, "Oh, and then you got to do this and that." And he's like, "Has anyone not had a combat assignment yet?" And there were just a few of us who raised our hand because I had been in this echelon above Cour assignment in Munich. And he was like, "Oh yeah, so you'll want to make sure you go. That's where you got to go next." And the other people were like, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." And I guess I got a look on my face, because it was not, that was one thing I knew I did not want to do. So he's like, "What?" He's like clued in on me. He's like, what's that face about?" And I was like, "I really would rather not, and it's like, you're that person in the room where everything goes silent. And he's just like, "Well, we'll see you then," or something like that. And and then later, of course, people come up to me and they're like, "Oh my God, I was thinking the same thing." But I originally thought I would go for a career, but then that probably was some of the things that kept me from doing it because I didn't want to do some of that stuff. I just didn't. I wanted to do what I liked doing, what lit me up. And then, for me, I ended up getting out right around 8 years when I got pregnant. And so I could stay home with my son. But yeah, I love this idea that you're talking about what lights you up, and we're talking about passions, and we're talking about, being in your gift zone, because when you can do those other jobs and you can do a really great job, but it's just not the same as when you're in something that just lights you up. So I think I want people to know that, whether you're in the military or wherever in the world, like listen to that, the thing that where you lose time, where you're doing it and then you're like, whoa, what time is it? Because you got so into those are signs that you're in that, I like to call it, gift zone.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time now talking to students about like,
Mm,
so I actually have a mentor, had a mentor. She passed away 2 years ago at the
mm.
age of 107.
Oh my God.
But she coined this idea of leadership as a matter of how to be, not how to do. So when you focus on the
Yes.
values and the things that you stand for, all the rest of the stuff flows out of that.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like ringing a bell right now. Like that is so brilliant. And it's so elemental to living this, like you said, this life of service, this life of passion, this life of why, like examining why am I here, all of that. Like this is the stuff it starts with, and it is not the doing as much as the being and the or at least like having that being at the forefront, like what, like letting that guide you, what do I love, what lights me up, what's in my values. That's the other piece that I feel like America has lost track of, that people aren't acting from values. I'm not sure what they're acting from or making decisions from, but if you, everybody has values, and if you're intentional about them and you really lay out, a life. I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown's book Dare to Lead, and she has the values exercise in there where she's got pages and pages of values, and you have to whittle it down to your three top, and then live from that.
Yeah.
That's what you put in front of you when you make your choices.
So I have a hack around that because
Okay, let's hear it.
I've seen the exercise,
Yeah.
and I've seen like colleagues try to teach it, and like
Mm,
they give them, a list of 150 things. I say, think about what are the stories that inspire you. So who are the
mm,
people?
mm.
What are the experiences? And then that really helps you narrow down what are the things. So I have these two stories that help me to define what I stand for, and there are
Yeah.
these two people that probably mean the most. And it's again this woman that I already talked about. Her name's Frances Hesselbein. She
Hmm.
was CEO of the Girl Scouts when we were kids, from 76 to 90, transformed the
Wow.
Girl Scouts. And like she was just a volunteer, and she sort of like rose through the ranks of the organization.
Hmm.
So she talked about this defining moment of when she was 7 years old. Her grandmother had these beautiful Chinese vases that she always wanted to touch and play with. And one day she like pitched a fit to try to touch them. And her grandmother said, "You can't touch these. They're too valuable. And let me tell you how they came to me." And she talked about this Chinese laundryman that lived in their town in the turn of the 20th century. Um, he was the only Chinese person in the town. There was this big Chinese immigration, and they were terribly persecuted, and they could only do like laundries or restaurants. So he had
Yeah.
a laundry. Like kids chased him through the town, threw rocks at him. People called him all the racial slurs you can imagine.
Hmm.
Um, and one day he showed up at her door and delivered a package with the vases. And she couldn't understand why her laundryman wanted her to have his most valuable possession, because he was going back to China.
Hmm.
He didn't want to stay in the US anymore. And he told her, because in 10 years, you're the only person who ever called me by my name. And
Wow.
so she said at 7 years old, the lesson of respect for all people was the defining principle. Now, she came up with some other ones as she went through life, but
Yeah.
respect for all people was the thing in her mind that helped her to transform the Girl Scouts and triple the minority representation, and
Yes.
think about like all the new badges that they needed to have. And so that story of thinking about what is one thing you can trace back to. So for me, the one thing was my father, ninth grade education, spent his whole life. The only job I ever knew him to have was as a bus driver. And I was fine with that when I was a little kid, but then when I was in college, I was deeply embarrassed by it. And I thought my father completely lacked ambition. And it was real tension. And so I was at a leadership conference in like 2012, and this college student stood up and said, I'm surrounded by all these really accomplished peers who've written books, who started their own nonprofit when they were 15. They're student government leaders of 30,000 students. And I've done none of those things, and I don't feel like I belong here. So how do you know if you're a good enough leader? So I remembered a thing that happened to me when my father died. We went to his funeral. Well, of course we did. But at his funeral, we saw a woman nobody recognized. And the thing that was distinctive and why we noticed her is because she had Down syndrome. And we go through the whole service, and we're at the cemetery, and it's almost over. And the funeral director walks to the front holding this woman's hand. And she says, this is Karen, and she wants to say something. So Karen pulls out this letter, and she reads this letter saying, Mr. Ryan was the greatest man in the whole world. He was my bus driver for the last 5 years, and every day he took me to my job at Burger King and told me I did an amazing job. And I just want his family to know how much I'm going to miss him. Now, we couldn't figure out, how did this woman get to, like, we don't live in a major city. Like, we don't know how she got there. All we know is my father made this tremendous impact on her life. And then I started thinking about my father, the bus driver. He was meticulous in his appearance. He'd get up every morning, he'd be shining his shoes every night. That's how I actually learned how to shine boots. My dad taught me. He always made sure his stuff was all pressed, and he looked great. In between runs, he's picking up the trash on his bus and making sure everything's wiped down. But more importantly, he knew his regular customers. They were like his family. And he was so happy and positive every morning as people were getting on. We would see people, like one time we went to Disney World, we saw someone who was on his route, and he knew his kids, they knew each other's kids' names. They knew all these things. They had a friendship. And I realized at that moment with the girl that that's what leadership is. Leadership is about, motivating, influencing, inspiring, helping people get to where they're going. My dad was doing that. He was, imagine if that's the first person you see every morning on your way to work. He's setting the conditions for them to have a good day. If you just had a guy who's like, sit down, give me your money, isn't interested.
Yeah.
Is that going to make your day any better? No. So those two stories really influence the 5 big things that, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I would want people to say that I treat other people with dignity and respect, that I'm a selfless servant, that I care about being excellent. My dad was only a bus driver, but he was a really excellent bus driver. So he would say things like, I don't care if you collect trash, as long as you're the best, most educated trash collector. That's my expectation of you. And then integrity and doing the right thing when no one's looking is important to me, and being positive, because both of those people were about the most positive people I knew. Now, Frances Hesselbein was always positive. I never once saw her have a bad day. I can't say the same thing about my dad, but most of the time he was positive.
You probably had a more full picture of your father, having grown up with him. I love that though, because, there's so much I feel about our society now that has become just out of balance, out of whack things. And so this idea that, what is a good job? What is a job to be proud of? I mean, there's a whole community of people, and there's all kinds of things that need to be done. And so, children need to be watched and cared for. And, the way if we look at, so we put money at the center of our society and say, this is what matters. And then we say, you get this much. And who do we give the small amounts to? Teachers and caregivers, people caring for
doing
our
the most important jobs.
most important. And so we're completely out of whack in that. And so those jobs where you're caring for an individual, you're having this impact on them, pivotal moments in childcare, or like you say, the person you see every day who's getting you to your job, who's kind, who's safe. Because I rode buses a lot when I was young, because in where I lived in Orange County, that was a way to get around. As a young girl, there were moments where you were very uncomfortable on buses. So having a safe person at the front who's watching his bus, who's taking ownership, like, these are very important things that will have lifelong effects on people. Probably way more than, somebody who's trading in on Wall Street or something, but they're going to get paid a ton. But are they are they living in their values? Are they doing this kind of good in the world? So I always feel like lately, more and more, like we're just out of whack, and that we need to come in and look at what really is important. And so that's a lovely story about your dad. And what a this is another weird thing about me. I just really, as I'm aging, I'm having this affinity for memorials and services and funerals. Words not used as much out here anymore, but it's this idea that people come together to honor a life.
Mm,
And it is a place where you can learn things about people that because we're compartmented sometimes, so you maybe didn't know that piece. Obviously you weren't riding your dad's bus, you didn't
right.
necessarily, unless you met one of his friends at Disneyland. But for someone to show up at the funeral to want to share, that's just lovely. And yeah, so I love that. I love that you got that fuller picture, like it's like a gift for you after
Yeah.
your dad's gone.
And every single person has those stories and
Yes.
also has the ability to make that kind of impact. I mean, you
Yes,
never know who's going through what, and just being kind, how
exactly.
much that makes a difference.
Yeah, in everyday interactions, a smile, or someone who's struggling, just seeing someone in the eye and
Yeah.
trying to give them that can flip things so quickly.
There's a really famous story. I can't remember. The guy was some big like finance or CEO of something, and he talked
Mm,
about a final exam that he had in business school, probably at like Harvard or MIT or one of those places.
hmm.
And it was like a macroeconomics test or something. And he studied for it for days, and it had all these formulas. And he was so worried about the final. And he goes to the final, and there's one question on it, and it's worth the whole shebang. And the question is, what is the name of the woman who cleans this building?
Wow.
And so he failed it.
Yeah,
And he said he's never not known the name of the people who do those kinds of
to
things.
do
So
that. Yeah,
I always make sure I know, like, who are the names of all of the people who are doing the
yeah,
unseen labor that is helping me to do my job, and making sure
right.
I'm expressing my gratitude to those people and I'm taking an interest. I was really sad, like the woman who used to be our custodian in my department where I worked for 10 years at West Point just passed away. And I felt
Mm,
like I lost a family member, like because I had really formed a bond with her. I'd go back there, and when I'd see her, we'd be so excited to see each other. So,
yeah,
everybody has a role to play in lifting each other up.
yeah. That's just so wise and beautiful. I love that.
Well, I didn't
Well,
I
I
didn't think
look.
of it myself. I had really good examples of people who reminded me how important that is.
Yeah, and that's leadership, right? It's not always the mentor, the teacher, but it's all the people who can be teaching and leading in the world,
That's
which
right.
is why we open up and we look around and we don't dismiss people that we think are, I don't know, that for some reason society will dismiss. We as individuals can still see people and
Right.
hear them and check in. And my gosh, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm looking down and I'm seeing it's 40 minutes and we're out of time. And I definitely would love to have you back, because I feel like we just scratched the surface. We just talked about some really, really important fundamental principles, but there's so much more I want to hear about. So I
I
hope
would love
that
it.
good, good. I would love to do that. And I'm just really grateful to catch up with you. And I'm so grateful for everything you shared today. Keep up that good work. Well, like I said, we'll bring you back and we'll hear more about what you're doing now and some of those other experiences.
I would love it. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Marci. I
Thank
look forward to
you.
meeting your co-host Debbie, and I hope she's feeling better.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we'll talk again soon.
All right, sounds great.
And now for your core mental health break. This is your opportunity to take a moment to support your mental wellness, your peace of mind, your own ease and grace. Take some time every day to support your mental health. You deserve it, and it matters. So today we will do an affirmation. So I encourage you to speak this aloud. I am worthy. I am worthy. I am worthy. Let that be your affirmation for today. Thanks for listening to the Warrior Parent Podcast, which is a production of our nonprofit, Cour Experience, who also creates and distributes Cour tools. You can find us at courexperience.org. Make sure you join us next week for another informative conversation to help you and your family show up mindfully, purposefully, and joyfully with each other and in your community.
Our Cour Tools platform consists of a number of proven tools and techniques that are designed to reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm in spite of what's going on in your world. We want to thank Samuel Hale, LLC, for sponsoring this podcast. Technical and marketing support comes from Inspire Your Brand. Our podcast editor is Justin Beeden. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, the producers, or the financial supporters. I'm Debbie DeMano.
And I'm Marci Mitchell. Thanks for listening. If you resonate with the idea of creating a community to help support kids and families, won't you join us by following the podcast and sharing this episode? You can even write a review. It truly does take a village, and we appreciate you.